In the dead silence of the network, four hunters found each other. They weren't after the same prize until the game changed, and every keystroke became a move in a war no one could see. It starts, as so many global stories do, in places that have never met, and in lives that seem impossibly far apart. In a dimly lit nightclub on the outskirts of a Romanian town, 15-year-old Renee Kreutz moves in a circle of friends, swaying to a pop beat that has conquered radio stations from Los Angeles to Bucharest. The air smells of syrupy drinks and cherry lip gloss. No one here imagines that this carefree teenager will one day be a name whispered in cybercrime investigations around the world. Half a continent away, in Shanghai, a former state-sponsored hacker named Bolin Cho sits at a bar, pretending to be just another weary night shift worker. The glass in front of him holds cheap beer, but his real drink is the unsecured Wi-Fi pulsing through the air. His laptop quietly rides the invisible waves, watching every unsecured connection made by unsuspecting foreigners checking their email over dinner. In Washington, D.C., the head of the NSA, Admiral Michael Rogers, is explaining to lawmakers why the next great threat to national security won't look like the last. Nuclear weapons, he warns, are expensive, hard to acquire. Cyber weapons are the opposite: cheap, accessible, and frighteningly easy to deploy. 3 scenes, 3 continents. None of these people have met, and yet they are all stepping toward the same invisible battlefield. And in a silent, plus-sign-shaped room high above Midtown Manhattan, Carl Ramirez, a wiry, unassuming bank security manager, is waiting for a war he can't see, but knows is coming. A war that won't be fought with soldiers or bombs, but with floods of digital traffic aimed like missiles at the heart of the financial system. The attack will have a name: Operation Ababil. Its architects, a group calling itself the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam Cyber Fighters, claim they are answering political insults against Islam. Carl doesn't buy it. Motives in cyber war are rarely so tidy, and often just a cover for something bigger. Within days, Carl will be trapped in that cold, silent room, facing an enemy that comes in endless waves of data, a digital siege designed to drown the bank's online presence. He will eat at his desk, sleep in snatches, and watch the rest of his team fade into supporting roles as the complexity of the attack pushes beyond their limits. He will also learn something else: that in moments of crisis, the corporate world suddenly remembers the value of people like him, and that value can be measured in the size of the budget they're suddenly willing to hand over. But for now, the clock is still ticking toward the first wave. And somewhere in Romania, a teenage girl is laughing under strobe lights, oblivious to the fact that she will soon be one of the reasons global banks and intelligence agencies lose sleep at night. It begins in fragments, scattered across continents, each scene unfolding with no awareness of the others, yet all moving toward an intersection that will one day feel inevitable. In the outskirts of a Romanian town, a Thursday night pulses with the thump of bass and laughter. A 15-year-old girl named Renee Kreutz spins in a loose circle of friends on the dance floor, her auburn hair catching flashes of neon light. The air tastes of sugar and cheap alcohol, the kind served without questions in clubs that pretend to check IDs but never push too hard. Her friends shout the lyrics to a pop song that has traveled thousands of miles to reach them. No one here is thinking about the future, much less a future where this girl's name will appear in classified briefings and cross the desks of intelligence agencies. Far away in Shanghai, a man in his 30s sits alone at the corner of a bar meant for expatriates. His beer is flat, but that's not why he's here. Bolin Cho, once a government hacker for the Chinese state, now scrapes by in low-paying jobs that keep him close to open Wi-Fi networks. The room hums with conversations in English and French, but his attention is locked on the invisible streams of data flowing into his laptop. Hotel bookings, email logins, unguarded financial transactions from travelers who believe they're anonymous in the crowd. In Washington, D.C., Admiral Michael Rogers addresses a congressional panel under the bright, sterile lights of a hearing room. His voice is measured, his warnings blunt. Nuclear arms are difficult to build, he says. Cyber weapons are not. You don't need decades of infrastructure or billions of dollars. You just need a laptop, an internet connection, and the will to use them. And in a silent, oddly cross-shaped office high above Midtown Manhattan, Carl Ramirez stares at 3 locked doors and a phone with its wires ripped out. The space feels abandoned, though he knows it isn't. It's 2012, and in less than 24 hours, the bank he works for will come under a siege unlike anything he's faced before. A flood of malicious internet traffic designed to crash its systems and keep them down. The attackers call themselves the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam cyber fighters. Officially, they claim their mission is retaliation for insults to Islam. Carl has been in the game long enough to know that stated motives are often a mask. Soon, the temperature in the operations room will drop to keep everyone awake. Sandwiches will arrive in stacks from the cafeteria, untouched until they're cold. Executives will drift in to stand behind Carl, offering the occasional sigh or nod before vanishing back into meetings. The technical battle will last for days, and as it wears on, Carl will notice that his team is shrinking. Not in numbers, but in influence. The deeper the attack cuts, the more it falls to him alone to push back. Somewhere in the chaos, he'll recognize the shift in how the suits look at him. Before the crisis, cybersecurity was a budget line to be trimmed. Now, in the middle of it, it's a shield worth fortifying at any cost. That realization will carry its own strange thrill, though he knows it won't last. While Carl watches the first signs of the attack light up his monitors, Renee is still on the dance floor in Romania, twirling under flickering lights, her voice hoarse from shouting along to songs in English she barely understands. Her world, in this moment, feels impossibly small. She doesn't know that one day she'll step into the same current of events that now swirls around bankers, generals, and state-sponsored hackers. A current pulling all of them toward the same, unseen collision. The first wave hits with no sound, no flashing lights, only numbers on a screen that spike in impossible ways. Packets flood the bank's servers from thousands of sources at once, an ocean of meaningless requests designed to drown the real ones. On the network maps, it looks like a storm spreading across the globe, curling inward toward a single point: the bank's public-facing systems. Carl feels the familiar jolt of adrenaline, that split second before muscle memory takes over. Fingers move across the keyboard in quick, precise motions. Firewall rules are rewritten, filters adjusted, traffic rerouted. Somewhere outside his chilled room, customers are already finding that their online accounts won't load, payment portals hang, and bill transfers time out. They don't know why yet. By the time the headlines start to appear, the fight will already be hours old. In a glass tower a few blocks away, senior executives huddle in a boardroom, watching charts and bullet points scroll across a projector screen. To them, this is an abstract event, defined in cost-per-minute calculations and potential public relations damage. In Carl's head, it's much simpler. A duel between him and an adversary skilled enough to test his limits. Halfway around the world, in a cramped apartment in Moscow, Valery Romanov watches the same bank's network from the inside. He isn't part of the group launching the attack, but he can see the chaos it's creating, and the opportunities it opens. As the defenders focus all their attention on holding back the flood, other doors stand ajar, less obvious points of entry leading to systems that no one is guarding. Valery smiles, tilts a half-empty vodka bottle, and scrolls through lists of exposed data as if flipping through a catalog. Back in Romania, the music changes. Renee is flushed, sweat beading along her hairline, her arms flung around the shoulders of friends. The club is small, almost claustrophobic, but she feels like she's standing in the center of the world. Her phone buzzes in her bag. She ignores it. Whatever it is can wait. Nights like this are for being untouchable, for laughing so hard your ribs ache, for believing there is nothing beyond the glow of the lights above your head. In the operations room, hours pass without the rhythm of day or night. The attack surges and ebbs, each lull tempting Carl to believe it might be over. Then it slams back harder, forcing him to tear up the plan he thought might hold. His headset crackles with voices, engineers from other teams, outside consultants, even government liaisons who've been patched in to monitor the situation. The language is clipped, technical, almost surgical. But beneath it, Carl can hear the urgency. This is more than a disruption. It's a warning shot, and no one knows what might follow. Far away from any of these rooms, Renee leans against the cool wall outside the club, catching her breath. The night air smells faintly of rain. She doesn't know it yet, but in a few short years she will be sitting at a glowing screen of her own, not dancing but orchestrating movements across networks, becoming a ghost in the same kind of systems now under siege in Manhattan. For now, though, she pushes off the wall, heads back inside, and disappears again into the blur of music and motion, while the storm in the digital world gathers strength. By the third day, fatigue starts to seep in, not just for Carl, but for everyone drawn into the fight. The air in the operations room is sharp with the smell of stale coffee and the faint tang of overheated electronics. Fluorescent lights hum overhead, turning every face a shade paler. Carl's eyes burn from staring at monitors, but he doesn't dare look away for long. Each spike in traffic is like a wave threatening to crash over a seawall already straining under the weight. The attackers are disciplined. They rotate their sources, change their patterns, never letting the defense settle into a rhythm. It's not just brute force. There's choreography here, an intelligence behind the chaos. Carl recognizes it and can't help but feel a flicker of respect. Whoever is on the other side understands patience. In a cluttered back room in Tel Aviv, two men sit hunched over laptops, the bluish glow casting deep shadows across their faces. They're not the architects of the DDoS barrage, but they're using it like cover fire. While the bank's defenders are fixated on the deluge at the gates, these two slip in through side channels, quietly mapping out parts of the network that would otherwise be guarded. Every extra minute the main assault continues is another minute for them to explore without setting off alarms. Carl doesn't know about them. What he does know is that the bank's top brass have started to linger more often in the doorway, their voices low but their eyes sharp. They've gone from polite concern to barely concealed urgency, the kind that only comes when they've realized the numbers they're looking at could turn into headlines. And still, the world outside moves at its own pace. In a rainy corner of Bucharest, Renee's weekend is winding down. She scrolls through grainy photos taken at the club, laughing at how the colors bleed together under the strobe lights. She doesn't think about banks or hackers or the invisible lines of code that tie the world together. Her biggest worry is whether she can convince her parents she was studying with friends. In Moscow, Valerie finishes another cigarette and leans back in his chair, scanning the latest system logs. The chaos inside the bank's network is like white noise now, a constant backdrop to his own quiet work. He's found something promising, a series of overlooked access points leading deeper into the bank's infrastructure. It would be easy to take advantage now, but he doesn't. Not yet. Timing, he knows, is everything. Back in Manhattan, Carl's fingers hover over the keyboard during a brief lull. He knows these pauses are never final. He knows they're just breaths before the next push. But in that moment, with the hum of the servers in his ears and the cold air keeping him alert, he feels the pull of the fight. It's exhausting, yes, but it's also the purest form of his work. A test of skill against an opponent he can't see and may never meet, yet whose presence he can feel in every line of code that blinks across his screen. By the end of the week, the attack slows, not in surrender, but in a deliberate, almost theatrical retreat. The traffic drops in stages, each wave receding a little more than the last until, finally, the monitors show only the hum of normal activity. It feels anticlimactic, as if a storm cloud had simply drifted away instead of breaking apart. Carl doesn't relax right away. He's seen this before, the false calm meant to lull defenders into lowering their guard. For hours, he keeps watching, waiting for the sudden spike that will announce the next barrage. But it doesn't come. What breaks the tension isn't an alert, but a terse email from senior leadership declaring the incident resolved and thanking everyone for their tireless dedication. It's a small victory, but it's also a turning point. The executives who once needed cybersecurity explained to them like a foreign language now speak of it as an urgent priority. Budgets that were tight suddenly loosen. Proposals that had languished in committee are approved in hours. In the quiet after the fight, Carl can feel the shift in the air, the rare moment when those in charge actually understand the value of what his team does. Somewhere in the Romanian countryside, Renee is finishing her homework at the kitchen table, her hair pulled back in a loose knot. She's still years away from the world Carl inhabits, but the path is already forming under her feet. The connections she will make, the choices she will take, will carry her far from this small, dimly lit room. In Moscow, Valerie scrolls through news reports about the attack. Most of them get the details wrong, oversimplifying the methods, misidentifying the culprits, turning a complex event into a headline-sized caricature. He knows better. He's been inside the network, seen the fractures the public will never hear about. And he knows those cracks won't close overnight. In Tel Aviv, the two men who used the chaos as their cover are already working through the data they took, sorting it, tagging it, looking for threads worth pulling. They're not finished. This was just the beginning of a longer play. Carl shuts down his terminal long after the rest of the floor has gone dark. His eyes are gritty, his shoulders tight, but his mind is still tracing the lines of the battle that's just ended. In the glow of the exit sign, he blows warm air over his knuckles like a gunslinger cooling the barrel after a duel. The war, he knows, is far from over. This was just the first skirmish in a conflict that will keep returning, each time sharper, faster, and more personal. The first full day after the attack ends feels strangely hollow. The operations room, once a buzzing hive of tension and clipped commands, is quiet except for the low hum of machines. Screens that had been alive with surges of red and orange now display static greens. For the staff filtering back into their regular routines, it's as if a great storm has passed and left no trace except exhaustion. Carl lingers in his chair longer than he needs to. Part of him is reluctant to walk away, as though the moment he steps out, the unseen enemy will return. Another part of him knows the attackers have achieved one of their real goals, showing they can reach in, strike hard, and walk away at will. In cyber warfare, the message is often the weapon. In another time zone, on another continent, the same message is being read differently. In a private flat in Moscow, Valery Romanov scrolls through intercepted chatter in multiple languages. He's sifting for patterns, not of what was done, but of what was left undone. The DDoS storm was only one part of the story, and he's interested in the doors left ajar during the chaos. He knows they'll be closed soon. Defenders always scramble to patch the holes after the obvious threats are gone. But for the moment, the blueprint of the bank's defenses is fresh in his mind and in his notes. In Tel Aviv, the two men who had threaded their way into the bank systems during the attack sit shoulder to shoulder at a battered desk. Between them is a laptop running a slow, methodical program, sorting data into labeled archives. Names, account numbers, transaction histories, each thread is tagged for later weaving. Their work is quiet, precise, the kind that leaves no easy fingerprints. This isn't about quick profit. It's about building something bigger, the kind of foundation that can be turned into a dozen different operations months or even years from now. Across the Romanian countryside, the air is crisp with the tail end of winter. Renee Kreutz walks home from school with two friends, their conversation bouncing from local gossip to the latest music videos. Her life, for now, is bounded by familiar streets and predictable routines. But threads are already in motion that will pull her far from this orbit. When her phone buzzes in her pocket, she doesn't know that the online world she dips into for fun will one day be the same arena where names like Carl Ramirez and Valery Romanov circle. In the glass towers of Manhattan, the after-action reports begin. Carl finds himself in conference calls with executives he's never met, walking them through timelines and countermeasures. Their voices carry a mix of relief and unease. Relief that the systems are stable again. Unease that it took a team running on caffeine and instinct to keep them that way. There's talk of strategic investments in security, and Carl can tell they mean money. He's been in this game long enough to know that these promises are made loudest when the fear is fresh. In a few months, budgets will be reviewed, priorities will shift, and the urgency will fade, unless the next storm arrives first. For Valery, the urgency never fades. Each operation, whether he's directly involved or watching from the shadows, is another step in a long game. He's survived too many shifts in the digital underworld to believe in permanence. Governments adapt, corporations adapt, even criminals adapt. The only constant is the need to stay one step ahead of the change. Carl powers down his terminal late in the evening, the city lights spilling in through the high windows. In the silence, he can almost hear the echo of the last few days, the low murmur of voices, the clatter of keyboards, the faint, steady beep of system monitors. He knows the fight will return, maybe from the same adversary, maybe from someone entirely different. The players change, the tools evolve, but the game never ends. Somewhere far from here, Renee is getting ready for another night out. Music and laughter spill from her phone's tinny speaker as she checks her reflection in the mirror. She has no idea that the lines between her world and Carl's are already, invisibly, beginning to blur. The shift from crisis to routine never feels natural. One week, Carl is surrounded by the chaos of an active attack, immersed in the adrenaline of defending something vital. The next, he's back in a cycle of status updates, project timelines, and meetings where the conversation drifts from urgent to abstract. The suits like their danger packaged into digestible charts. He watches them debate initiatives that were rubber-stamped in the heat of the battle, now suddenly open to review. The proposed budget increases are already shrinking at the edges, language softening from immediate action to strategic consideration. It's the same pattern he's seen before. Fear unlocks the vault. Complacency closes it again. In the corporate hierarchy, cybersecurity is still a cost center, a necessity, but one that doesn't generate revenue. That reality drives every conversation at the top. Carl knows the next real change will only happen when another attack hits, and by then it might be too late to catch up. Thousands of miles away in Romania, Renee's world is narrowing in its own way. School feels small, predictable. The internet is where things seem alive, where people talk about possibilities that stretch far beyond her town. She spends hours in late-night chats, learning to slip into spaces she wasn't invited to, not always understanding the full implications. The thrill comes from crossing invisible lines and finding herself somewhere she shouldn't be, unseen and unnoticed. In Moscow, Valerie's situation has shifted. The pressure from law enforcement is heavier now, and his network of safe connections is smaller than it once was. He's more careful, but also more deliberate. The game has become one of patience and precision. Rather than jumping at every opportunity, he hoards access, saving the best vulnerabilities for moments when the payoff will be worth the risk. And in Tel Aviv, the men who exploited the bank's distraction are starting to move their operation into its next phase. The data they pulled during the chaos has been sorted and cross-referenced with information from other breaches, creating detailed profiles of potential targets. These aren't random victims. They're carefully chosen for wealth, predictability, and the likelihood they'll never see the trap until it's sprung. Back in Manhattan, Carl catches sight of his own reflection in the black glass of a dormant monitor late one night. He thinks about the unseen connections between these worlds, how a teenager in Romania, a veteran hacker in Russia, and shadow operators in Israel can all be linked by invisible lines of code and timing. He doesn't know their names yet, but in this line of work, it's only a matter of time before paths cross, not by chance, but by design. And somewhere in that web, the next battle is already starting to take shape. It just hasn't been given a name yet. It begins, as most trouble does, without fanfare.
No alarms.
No frantic calls from the boardroom. Just a tiny irregularity buried deep in the network logs. So small it's almost invisible. Carl spots it while skimming through the day's automated reports, a faint ripple against the smooth backdrop of routine traffic. He leans closer, pulling the data apart. It's a request that doesn't belong. Not obviously malicious, but oddly placed, like a single wrong note in a familiar melody. A false alarm? Possibly. But Carl's instincts, sharpened by years of these silent games, tell him otherwise. Elsewhere, someone else is watching too. In a dim apartment in a crowded neighborhood of Bucharest, a laptop screen glows against peeling walls. Renee sits cross-legged on the bed, her face lit by the shifting colors of multiple open windows. She's not thinking about Carl or about banks or about the implications of what she's doing. She's thinking about the puzzle in front of her, an access point she found by accident, and the challenge of figuring out where it might lead. In Moscow, Valerie receives an encrypted message on a private channel. The sender is cautious, using a handle Valerie hasn't seen in years. The contents are brief. A hint about a target, along with the suggestion that something's coming. He doesn't respond right away. Instead, he reads it 3 times, letting the implications settle in. Opportunities like this don't announce themselves twice. Carl spends the afternoon running quiet traces, threading his way backward through the data to see where the irregular request originated. The trail winds unpredictably, jumping between countries, routed through compromised devices, the usual attempt to mask a point of origin. But the deeper he digs, the more convinced he becomes that someone is testing the defenses, mapping the structure without triggering an alert. Renee doesn't think of it as reconnaissance. For her, it's exploration, finding the hidden paths in a game that never officially ends. But each step she takes leaves a faint mark, and those marks, however scattered, begin to form a pattern someone like Carl can recognize. Valerie closes his laptop and steps outside into the Moscow evening. Snowflakes drift lazily under the glow of the streetlights. He doesn't smile often, but there's a flicker of one now. If the right people are in motion, the coming weeks could be interesting and profitable. In the skyscraper-lined streets of Manhattan, the last daylight fades as Carl marks the anomaly for deeper review. He doesn't know who's on the other side yet, but he can feel it, the same faint tension that hums through the air just before a storm. By the next morning, the anomaly has multiplied. What was a single misplaced request is now a scattering of them, each one altered just enough to seem unrelated, but similar enough to be unmistakable to anyone watching closely. Carl's terminal becomes a patchwork of connection attempts, some from obscure service providers in small towns, others from major cities that serve as hubs for countless legitimate users. Whoever's behind it is threading the needle, staying just inside the bounds of plausibility. He calls in one of the younger analysts, a sharp coder named Malik who's good at pattern recognition. Together they begin mapping the activity, overlaying the timestamps, the digital fingerprints, the subtle quirks that machines inherit from the humans operating them. The picture that emerges isn't random. It's a deliberate sweep, like someone running their fingers along the edges of a locked door, feeling for weaknesses. In Bucharest, Renee's own mapping is progressing. She's working through layers of obfuscation, each one peeling back to reveal another. It's not a straight path. The systems twist back on themselves, diverting her into dead ends, looping her through meaningless data. But she's patient. She takes notes, sketches crude diagrams in a spiral notebook, marking where she's been and where she thinks the real entrances are hidden. Valerie, meanwhile, is no longer content to watch from the sidelines. He taps into an old network of contacts, sending out discreet feelers about the current state of certain banks' internal systems. He asks in a way that doesn't sound like asking, framing it as idle conversation. The replies he gets back are cautious, but enough to confirm what he suspected. Someone else is already moving inside. Carl spends the evening combing through historical logs, looking for earlier signs he might have missed. Deep in the archives, he finds them. Faint echoes of the same probing pattern from weeks ago, buried so deep they almost escaped notice. This isn't a new player arriving. This is someone who's been here a while, testing the ground before making a move. Renee pauses only when her laptop battery dips into the red. She plugs in, glances out the window at the street below, and feels that quiet rush she always gets when she's close to breaking through. It's not about money, not yet. It's about proving to herself she can reach somewhere she's not supposed to be. In Moscow, Valerie leans back in his chair, staring at the faint reflection of his own face in the darkened window. He knows the difference between a casual intruder and a serious operator. Whoever's in play here isn't just curious. They're building towards something. And in his world, the smartest move is to be standing in the right place when the door finally opens. By the third day, the pattern is undeniable. Carl watches the activity snake its way through the bank's network like a shadow moving under a locked door. Each probe is quiet, calculated, designed to skim past the intrusion detection systems without tripping alarms. To the casual eye, it looks like harmless background noise. To him, it's the start of a conversation, one the other side clearly expects him not to hear. Malik brings him a fresh data visualization, a map of connection attempts that looks almost like constellations scattered across a black sky. Clusters form in places they shouldn't, dense points of activity tied together by thin, faint lines. It's artistry in its own way, Someone out there is tracing the architecture of the bank's defenses with the same care a surveyor uses when mapping new territory. In Bucharest, René's notes are starting to take shape into something more structured. What began as scattered sketches has become a layered diagram, arrows pointing between nodes, shorthand symbols marking what she thinks each point represents. She's learned to move slowly, to mask her presence as she works, slipping in and out before the system can register her as anything unusual. The real challenge isn't getting in, it's staying invisible long enough to learn the terrain. Valerie hears from one of his contacts in Eastern Europe a cryptic update about a new girl making ripples in certain channels. The description is thin, just enough to pique his interest without revealing much. He files it away, suspecting it connects to the faint tremors he's already felt in the bank systems. He doesn't chase it directly. Instead, he adjusts his own movements to skirt the edges of her work, close enough to watch but far enough not to spook her. Carl stays late, poring over firewall logs and endpoint telemetry, building his own model of the intruder's route. He knows he should escalate it to upper management, but he also knows what will happen if he does. Committees, meetings, too many eyes too soon. Whoever's on the other side will see the defenses shift and vanish before he can learn more. For now, he keeps it contained, shared only with Malik, a quiet hunt running in parallel to the bank's routine operations. René, in her room lit only by the bluish glare of the screen, takes a moment to study her own path so far. She can sense the perimeter now, can feel where the walls are strongest and where they flex under pressure. Somewhere beyond them, she's sure, lies the kind of access that changes everything. And far away, in a different city and a different life, Valerie closes his laptop for the night, already considering how best to step into a game that's just starting to get interesting. In his world, timing isn't just important. It's the only thing that matters. By the end of the week, the movement inside the network feels almost alive. Carl can sense when the probing is about to happen, the same way a sailor learns to read the shift in wind before a storm. The intervals aren't random anymore. They follow a rhythm, subtle but deliberate, with just enough variation to avoid a perfect pattern. Whoever's orchestrating it knows how to keep a footprint faint while still pushing forward. Malik runs a deeper packet capture, pulling the raw data into a sandbox. What they see isn't sloppy. The packets are wrapped in layers of ordinary traffic, harmless-looking requests for images, ads, even weather updates. Inside those, though, are tiny queries, each one asking a different question about the system's structure. It's reconnaissance disguised as noise. In Bucharest, René narrows her focus. She's found what she believes is an unguarded maintenance endpoint, something that looks abandoned but still hums quietly in the background. The code is old, almost brittle, and it doesn't respond like the newer systems. That makes it dangerous, fragile enough that one wrong move could crash it and draw attention. But it also means it might be overlooked by anyone monitoring the main defenses. She treats it like a locked side gate in a sprawling estate. Valerie hears about the same endpoint from a different source, an automated scan report traded in a private forum. He knows most people who see it will ignore it, dismissing it as too unstable to be worth the risk. But unstable can also mean neglected. Neglected can mean vulnerable, and vulnerabilities to him are invitations. Carl debates taking the endpoint offline as a precaution but hesitates. It's the one place where the intruder keeps circling back, touching it lightly before withdrawing. Pulling it down now would be like slamming the door before learning who's knocking. Instead, he tightens the perimeter around it without locking it entirely, turning it into something like a baited corridor. Safe enough to observe, risky enough to keep an amateur out. René spends hours inside that brittle code, stepping carefully, marking every variable she can reach without breaking anything. She doesn't know she's being watched. She just knows the air here feels different. Quieter, older, less patrolled. Valerie, for now, holds back. He wants to see who reaches the center first, and whether they're worth making contact with afterward. In his experience, patience often reveals more than pressure. And somewhere high above the city in the bank's secured operations floor, Carl watches another faint flicker appear in his logs, right on schedule. The dance continues, and he still doesn't know the name of his partner. 2 days later, the flickers turn into deliberate steps. The intruder no longer seems to be feeling along the walls. They're following a path, revisiting the same sequence of points with small adjustments each time, like a locksmith testing different keys in a stubborn lock. Carl sits forward in his chair, elbows on the desk, eyes locked on the live feed of network activity. Malik hovers beside him, murmuring timestamps and source flags, their voices low even though the floor around them is empty at this hour. This is no longer passive reconnaissance. Someone is rehearsing for entry. In Bucharest, Renee finally gets what she's been waiting for. A response that isn't a polite error message. It's small, just a fragment of information the system shouldn't be giving out, but it means she's through the outermost barrier. She pulls back immediately, heart pounding, fingers trembling over the keyboard. That single moment confirms what she suspected. There's a way inside, and she's found it. Valerie receives another update from his quiet observer inside one of the bank's peripheral systems. Movement. The message says nothing more. He knows better than to press for details on an insecure line. Instead, he starts setting up his own access points, not into the bank directly, but into the channels where chatter about the bank is most likely to surface. If someone else makes a breakthrough, he wants to know within minutes. Carl decides it's time to lay a trap. Using the brittle maintenance endpoint as bait, he injects subtle markers into the data, invisible to a casual glance but designed to cling to anything that passes through, like microscopic dye in a water supply. If the intruder takes anything from here and tries to use it elsewhere, those markers will whisper back to him. Renee spends the evening replaying the sequence in her head, refining the exact series of steps that got her the sliver of access. She knows she'll have to move carefully now. One misstep and the door could slam shut for good, but the pull is too strong to ignore. She wants to see what's deeper inside. Valerie watches his screens light up with small bursts of activity in channels that had been dormant for weeks. Someone is talking, not openly, not about the bank by name, but about a system that's worth the trouble. He smiles faintly, knowing that in this world, vagueness is just another way of saying the stakes are high. Back in Manhattan, Carl leans back in his chair, eyes closed for just a moment. He knows the next step is coming. The rhythm has changed, the pattern is set, and the person on the other side is about to make their move. What he doesn't know is whether they'll walk straight into his net, or if they're laying one of their own. That night, the move comes. It begins as a single connection, nothing out of place on its own, but Carl has been watching for it. The packets slip into the brittle endpoint and follow the path he's seen tested a dozen times before. Only this time, they don't withdraw. They keep going, bypassing one of the automated authentication checks in a way that shouldn't be possible without internal knowledge. He signals Malik without looking away from the screen. Together, they trace the path in real time, watching as the intruder skirts around active monitoring tools and threads into a subdirectory that hasn't been touched in months. In her dim room in Bucharest, Renee barely blinks as lines of code crawl down her terminal. She's deep in the sequence now, past the point where she could plausibly claim curiosity if she's discovered. She knows it. She also knows that if she hesitates, the access could vanish. The old maintenance code she's inside feels fragile, like it might crumble at any second, but she keeps going, steady, deliberate. Valerie, hours ahead in Moscow, notices a flicker in one of his passive monitoring points, a signal he recognizes instantly as a transfer handshake. He doesn't know what's being moved, but the fact that it's moving at all tells him someone has crossed a threshold. He leans forward, scanning for indicators, trying to decide whether to insert himself now or wait for the dust to settle. Carl's trap works. As the intruder pulls a small packet of data from the endpoint, the invisible markers he planted wrap themselves around it. Seconds later, his console registers the beacon, not just confirming the exfiltration, but revealing the rough network path it takes once it leaves the bank. Renee doesn't notice the markers. She's already storing the fragment in a secure container, disconnected from her working system. She's careful, almost paranoid, about keeping her work compartmentalized. Still, she can't shake the rush that comes with having something in her possession that wasn't meant to be hers. Valerie closes one monitoring window and opens another, pulling up a private chat with a trusted associate in Eastern Europe. He types a single line, Someone's inside. It's not a warning. It's an opportunity. Carl sits back, staring at the path his marker is tracing across the map. A route that leads east, jumping through a series of compromised systems. It's not enough to put a name to his adversary yet, but it's a trail. And in his world, a trail is a gift you don't waste. What he doesn't know is that while he's following that trail, someone else entirely is watching him follow it. The watcher sits far from all three of them, in a room where the blinds are always drawn and the air smells faintly of dust and old coffee. Multiple screens fill the wall, each displaying a different fragment of the same unfolding picture. Carl tracking his markers, Renee probing deeper, Valerie circling the edges. The watcher isn't here to stop anyone. They're here to observe, to catalog, to decide which thread to tug when the time is right. Carl refines the trace, narrowing the location of the system that received the data. It's not a final destination, more like a staging point, but the region it sits in is unmistakable. Eastern Europe, not specific enough to be actionable, but enough to stir a quiet unease in the back of his mind. Renee tests the fragment she's pulled, combing through its structure without trying to alter it. It's an innocuous piece of configuration data, but it's tied to something bigger, the kind of bigger that might give her a map of where to go next. She sketches out the connections in her notebook, a growing spiderweb of possibilities. In Moscow, Valerie weighs his options. Jumping in now risks exposing himself, but waiting too long means letting someone else claim the prime position. He opts for the middle ground, preparing access points that will let him slip into the environment the moment it destabilizes. In his experience, these little storms rarely stay contained. The watcher makes a note on a digital ledger not about the data itself but about the behaviors. The way Carl leaves the bait alive. The way Renee backs off after each success, resisting the urge to push too far too fast. The way Valerie positions himself like a fisherman waiting for a bite. Patterns like these matter more than the tools they use. Tools change. Patterns don't. Carl loops Malik in on the latest trace results. They start compiling a profile, not of the intruder's identity but of their style, how they move, how they hide, how they return to the same points without leaving obvious marks. Style can be as distinctive as a fingerprint, and Carl knows if he can match it to known activity, he'll at least know the league he's playing in. Renee closes her laptop as dawn edges into the room. She hasn't told anyone about what she's doing. Not her friends. Not the online acquaintances she chats with. This is hers alone. A private challenge she's not ready to share. But even as she rests her head back against the wall, she's already thinking about her next move. Valerie stands by his window, watching the dim glow of the city before sunrise. Somewhere out there, a player he doesn't know is moving through the same space he hunts in. That thought doesn't bother him. It excites him. The best games are never played alone. And in the shadowed room with the drawn blinds, the watcher marks the date and time. The pieces are in motion, and for the first time in months, the board is starting to look interesting again. Carl doesn't have to wait long for the next sign. 2 nights later, just past midnight, the Brittle Endpoint lights up again. Not with a single connection, but with several, each spaced by seconds. Whoever's behind it is moving faster now, retracing steps that once took hours, compressing them into a tight sequence. They're confident. Malik watches over Carl's shoulder as the markers fire again, pinging back from a fresh location. This time, the trace leads further east, bouncing briefly through a satellite link before dropping into an address range Carl hasn't seen before. He bookmarks it, running a quick lookup that yields nothing useful. No public records, no obvious cover organization. That kind of absence is almost as telling as a positive hit. In Bucharest, Renee's fingers fly across the keyboard. She's built a script to automate part of the process, a tool that handles the tedious steps so she can focus on navigating the results. The fragment she took last time has given her a clearer view of the network skeleton, and she's testing pathways that branch from the Brittle Endpoint into fresher, better defended systems. Every step in is harder than the last, but she's learning the rhythm of the defenses. Valerie's alert system pings. Not loudly, just a discrete banner in the corner of his screen. The signature matches one he's been shadowing, a pattern he suspects belongs to the same intruder he's been tracking. He doesn't follow directly. Instead, He shifts to an adjacent network, running parallel like a car pacing another on a dark highway. If they trip an alarm, he'll see the lights before they do. Carl decides to test the intruder. He alters the bait ever so slightly, moving a few pieces of data, planting subtle inconsistencies. If they're skilled, they'll notice. If they're not, they'll copy it as is, and those changes will lead Carl straight to their next step. Renee notices. She spots the mismatch instantly and pauses, suspicion prickling at the edges of her focus. She doesn't pull back, but she does change tactics, taking a longer route to her goal. Costs her time, but time feels safer than rushing into a trap. Valerie sees the same hesitation in the network flow, a moment where the activity slows, shifts direction, avoids a direct hit. That tells him something important. Whoever's inside knows they're being hunted. In a narrow, windowless room somewhere far from all three of them, the watcher smiles faintly at the screen. It's not often you get to see a chase where both hunter and hunted are aware of each other, and both keep moving forward anyway. The next exchange feels less like an intrusion and more like a dialogue. Carl sits in the dim light of the operations floor, watching the intruder work around his changes. They don't charge straight through. They skirt the edges, testing for consistency, cross-referencing against the paths they've already mapped. Every so often, they dip back into familiar ground, like they're confirming they still have the exits memorized. Malik murmurs that it's almost like they're tracing the shape of his bait rather than the bait itself. Carl agrees, though he keeps that thought to himself. Whoever's on the other end isn't in a hurry to grab and run. They're building something. In Bucharest, Renee is methodical, keeping her moves quiet, blending them into normal background traffic. Her script has evolved into a toolkit now, a set of commands she can adapt on the fly to different responses. She's careful not to overuse any one trick. Repeating herself would make her easier to spot. She knows she's already brushed close to a net once. Valerie, observing from Moscow, decides to probe the environment indirectly. He sends out queries through unrelated systems, touching the bank's outer layers without approaching the Brittle Endpoint directly. If anyone's watching the same way he is, they'll see those ripples and wonder if the waters just got more crowded. Carl catches the ripples almost immediately. They're different, not the style of the intruder he's been tracking, but still deliberate. A third presence. That complicates things. He and Malik mark the differences, setting separate alerts for each signature. Renee spots the ripples too, though she doesn't know who they belong to. Her first instinct is to retreat, but curiosity keeps her anchored. If someone else is here, maybe they'll open doors she hasn't reached yet. She decides to hold her position and watch. Valerie gets what he wants. Confirmation. He's not the only observer. That means the game is bigger than the players he can see. In the windowless room, the watcher logs another note. 3 signals now, moving in the same space, aware of one another but not yet colliding. It's a rare equilibrium, one that can't hold forever. Eventually, someone will make a move that forces the others to choose, retreat, adapt, or attack. And when that moment comes, none of them will have the luxury of pretending they're alone anymore. The balance breaks in the quiet hours before dawn. It's Carl who sees it first. A sudden burst of activity that doesn't match either of the established patterns. It's too fast, too direct, and it's aimed not at the Brittle Endpoint but at a higher value target deeper in the bank's internal network. Whoever it is, they're bypassing the breadcrumb trail entirely. Malik swears under his breath as the traffic races across their monitoring screens. Carl jumps into containment mode, spinning up segmentation protocols to isolate the affected systems. The move is risky, too aggressive, and they'll scare the intruder off before learning anything. Too slow, and the intruder will be gone with whatever they came for. In Bucharest, Renee freezes. She sees the sudden change in system behavior. A door swinging open somewhere she hasn't touched. It's tempting, dangerously so, but it doesn't feel like her work. Someone else has kicked it wide. She watches from the periphery, trying to map the route without stepping into it. Valerie's systems light up like a signal flare. He recognizes the tactic immediately. A smash and grab, the digital equivalent of kicking down a door and sweeping everything into a bag before anyone can respond. It's cruder than his style, but it works if speed is the only goal. He starts recording the packet flow, building a complete picture of the breach in progress. Carl pushes his containment net forward, corralling the rogue connection toward an isolated sandbox. For a few tense seconds, it works. The intruder's path narrows, their available exits shrinking. But then the traffic splits, fracturing into multiple simultaneous requests routed through unrelated servers. It's like watching a single shadow dissolve into a crowd. Renee catches part of that split, one of the phantom trails brushing against her own mapped route. She follows just far enough to see where it leads, a temporary drop zone in a server cluster she's never explored. It's gone in under a minute, wiped clean, but the coordinates are already in her notebook. Valerie smiles faintly at the maneuver. Whoever just ran that play knows how to cover their tracks, but in doing so, they've revealed something else. An appetite for risk. That kind of recklessness can be baited. In the Watcher's darkened room, a new column appears on the screen, tracking this fourth presence. For players now, each with different goals, each aware that the field has shifted. The equilibrium is gone. The hunt has truly begun. Carl doesn't sleep that night. Even after the smash-and-grab traffic fades, he stays at his station, combing through the traces it left behind. Most are faint, fragments no bigger than a few stray bytes, but together they outline a rough path, and that path intersects, briefly, with the Brittle Endpoint. Whoever kicked in the deeper door knew about the same side entrance his quiet intruder had been using. That's not coincidence. Malik runs correlation scripts, matching timestamps between the 3 known patterns and the newcomer. The overlap is brief, but it's there. A 30-second window where all 4 actors touched the same segment of the network. To Carl, that's confirmation. They've all seen each other now, even if indirectly. In Bucharest, Renee replays the night in her head while scrolling through her saved logs. The drop zone coordinates she caught are burned into her memory. She's never seen that cluster used before, and she wonders if it's some kind of staging area buried inside the bank's infrastructure. If it is, she knows it won't stay there long. Valerie, across the cityscape of Moscow, sets his own trap. Not in the bank, that's too crowded now, but in one of the offshore relay systems he knows the smash-and-grab operator used. He seeds it with false metadata, tempting enough to draw attention but harmless if stolen. His aim isn't to protect it, it's to watch who comes sniffing. Carl sends an encrypted message to a single contact outside the bank, someone in a government liaison role who owes him a favor. The note is short, multiple active actors inside target network. Possible coordination or collision. He knows the reply will be slow. Official channels never move at the pace of the threat. But it's insurance. Renee stays off the Brittle Endpoint for a day, working instead to flesh out her map of peripheral systems. She's trying to see the bank's network not as a fortress with one weak gate, but as a city with many roads in and out. The smash-and-grab proved there's more than one way to the center. Valerie's bait works faster than he expected. Less than 12 hours later, it's accessed, not by the smash-and-grabber, but by someone whose technique feels eerily close to Renee's. He doesn't know her name, but he knows her style now, and that's enough to begin closing the distance. In the Watcher's room, the feeds are alive with movement. For actors, all touching the same space within the span of a single day. It's no longer observation, it's convergence. The point where parallel hunts turn into collisions is coming fast. And when it hits, none of them will have time to prepare. The collision starts with a hesitation. Carl is monitoring the Brittle Endpoint when he sees it, an inbound connection that begins the usual sequence, then pauses mid-step. To an untrained eye, it's nothing, just a stalled request. But Carl has learned to read pauses. This one isn't indecision. It's waiting. Malik spots it too. They're expecting something, he says quietly. In Bucharest, Renee is the one holding still. She's reached the part of the sequence where she normally slips deeper, but this time she's lingering. Not because she's lost, but because she's noticed something odd. The endpoint is responding faster than usual, almost attentively. It feels like someone on the other side is present, watching her work. In Moscow, Valerie sees both of them in his peripheral telemetry. 2 distinct flows that have converged on the same system, circling without colliding. It's rare to watch an intrusion where both parties seem aware of each other and are still moving forward. He decides to stir the water. Without touching the bank directly, he sends a burst of low-level scans through a third-party vendor connected to its network. It's noisy, intentionally so, designed to force the defender's attention outward. Carl catches the flare instantly. It's a distraction, and he knows it, but even as he tightens filters to block the noise, the paused connection on the Brittle Endpoint resumes. The intruder slides in quickly, as if knowing their window just widened. Renee doesn't know who caused the distraction, but she uses it. Moving faster than she has before, she threads into a subdirectory she's only seen in fragments. This time, it opens fully, revealing a list of internal asset tags and system identifiers. She screenshots them, then backs out before the structure can shift. Valerie watches her retreat in real time through the traces. He doesn't pursue. He only notes the exact moment she leaves and where she entered from. In the Watcher's dim-lit room, the feeds show 3 overlapping trails and one new blip, the Smash-and-Grabber, silent since the last attack, reappearing at the network's edge. All 4 players are now within striking distance of each other. Carl leans back, scanning the logs. "Whoever's in there," he says to Malik, "they're not alone anymore. Neither is he." The Brittle Endpoint becomes the meeting ground no one agreed to. Carl watches the connections ripple through it in quick succession. Not simultaneous, but close enough that the logs overlap. Each signature is distinct, but they're all moving toward the same interior segment, like separate streams feeding into one channel. He feels the tempo pick up, the invisible pressure of multiple operators trying to get somewhere first. Malik keeps muttering timestamps, his voice tight. 3 seconds apart, 5 seconds apart. They're tripping over each other. In Bucharest, Renee feels the squeeze. Paths that were wide open yesterday now flicker with irregular latency, as if someone else's presence is dragging on the system's responses. She adjusts her route twice, slipping into less efficient corridors to avoid whatever's clogging the main one. Still, she can sense movement ahead of her, someone taking turns she hasn't reached yet. Valerie knows exactly where she is. He's shadowing her route from the outside, using his vantage points to see the faint digital fingerprints she leaves behind. He has no interest in stopping her. He wants to see what she flushes out, what doors she might open that he can slip through later. Then the 4th player, the Smash-and-Grabber, pushes in. They don't bother with subtlety, shoving packets through like a battering ram. The network's defenses twitch under the strain, auto-adjusting to counter the surge. It's the kind of disruption that can knock quieter intruders off balance. Carl sees it and reacts instantly, segmenting off the area under attack to contain the damage. But in doing so, he inadvertently corrals everyone, not just the brute force operator, into the same shrinking space. Renee feels the walls closing in. Her escape routes dim one by one as the network changes shape around her. She's not trapped yet, but she's running out of time. Valerie watches the tightening net and makes his move. He slips in along one of the still open lines, coiling close to where Renee is without touching her path. If she bolts, he wants to see which way she runs. And in the Watcher's shadowed room, the feed shows the convergence point glowing like a flare. For trails, 1 chamber, and no room left for all of them to pass unnoticed. The break comes from the loudest player. The Smash-and-Grabber, impatient with the network's shifting walls, detonates a payload meant to overwhelm the access controls. It's not elegant, more like flooding a locked door until the hinges give. But it works. Systems stutter, error messages flare, and for a few seconds the Brittle Endpoint behaves like an open wound. Carl reacts instantly, sealing high-priority segments and dumping everything into emergency logging. It's a gamble. Lock too much down, and he'll blind himself. Leave too much open, and the attackers will slip out with whatever they came for. Renee dives through the chaos. She doesn't know who caused it, but she uses the brief instability to reach a directory she's only glimpsed before. Inside, she finds a cache of encrypted files, too many to grab, so she takes just 2, marking their exact location before pulling back. Valerie moves at the same time, following a route Renee just cleared. He doesn't bother with the encrypted files. He's after the metadata, the structural information that will tell him how this system connects to others. He harvests it quickly, avoiding the Smash-and-Grabber's clumsy traffic as it thrashes through the space. Carl watches all three flows, tracking the beacons he planted weeks ago. He can tell which is which now, the cautious one, the patient one, the reckless one. And for the first time, he wonders if they're watching him in return. In the watcher's room, the feeds blur with movement. For actors moving inside a confined space, each with different objectives, each trying to extract what they can before the moment collapses. It's no longer a hunt. It's an escape. The escape begins like a tide pulling in 4 different directions. Carl's containment measures ripple outward, segmenting the brittle endpoint into smaller and smaller compartments. The intruders respond in kind. Renee slipping sideways into a narrow thread of older code, Valerie folding himself into the shadows of her path, the Smash-and-Grabber ramming straight toward a still-open outbound port. Malik is calling out movement faster than Carl can react to it. North segment closed, east path breached. 2 signatures merging in the southwest node. Wait, 3 no 1 dropped. In Bucharest, Renee doesn't notice Valerie at first. Her focus is on staying ahead of the automated lockdown, darting from node to node. But when she doubles back to an earlier point, she sees it. A faint ghost of her own path, traveling alongside hers but never quite touching. Someone's pacing her. Valerie stays just close enough to see her moves in real time. He's not after her prize. He's watching how she moves under pressure. Everyone leaves a signature when they're in a hurry. The Smash-and-Grabber is first to the exit or what they think is an exit. Carl anticipated their direction and rerouted that outbound port into a monitored sandbox. In less than a second, the brute force flow collapses into a dead loop, burning itself out. Renee finds her own way out, slipping through a forgotten maintenance link that Carl hasn't touched yet. She's careful to mask her final jump, breaking it into fragments that won't register as one clean escape. Valerie doesn't follow her all the way. Instead, he ducks out through a separate connection, one that crosses through a system unrelated to the bank entirely. By the time Carl's trace hits it, the trail has gone cold. Carl sits back, breathing hard, eyes on the empty brittle endpoint. 3 actors have slipped through his fingers, and the 4th is locked in a box he can study at his leisure. It's not a win, not yet, but it's something. And in the watcher's darkened room, the feed shows silence where there was chaos. The board has cleared, but the game hasn't ended. Pieces this bold don't stay off the table for long. The fallout begins quietly. Carl spends the next 48 hours combing through the data captured from the trapped Smash-and-Grabber. Most of it is noise, malformed packets, corrupted fragments from their own rushed exit. But buried inside is a single intact payload. It's not bank data. It's a toolkit. Scripts, exploits, and a few custom binaries he's never seen before. Someone brought their own weapons to the fight. Malik runs deep scans on the toolkit, peeling back layers until they find a watermark. Not a name, but a string of characters that appears in underground code repositories. Carl doesn't need to chase it yet. Whoever left it will surface again. Renee lays low. She spends her days picking apart the encrypted files she managed to take. The first one resists her entirely, locked behind an encryption scheme that would take months to break without specialized hardware. The second is different, an internal log file, compressed but not locked. It's a map of scheduled maintenance across the bank systems, annotated with technician notes. To most, it's mundane. To her, it's a roadmap. Valerie, meanwhile, studies the metadata he lifted. It confirms what he suspected. The bank's core systems aren't as centralized as they appear. There are redundant nodes scattered across jurisdictions, each one capable of operating independently for short bursts. In the right hands, that architecture isn't just a security measure, it's a potential attack surface multiplied by distance. Carl files his official report, keeping it deliberately incomplete. He names the Smash-and-Grabber as the primary threat, burying mention of the other 2 intruders under possible anomalies. The more breathing room he has to hunt them quietly, the better. Renee starts planning her next move using the maintenance log as a guide. She knows where the bank will be weakest in the coming weeks, windows measured in hours where certain defenses will be down for upgrades. Valerie prepares too, not for another intrusion, but for contact. He's seen enough of Renee's style to predict how she'll approach those windows, and he intends to be there first. And far from all three of them, the Watcher reviews the playback of the chase. For actors, for exits, one unfinished game. They mark 3 of the trails for continued observation. The smash-and-grabber, though, is discarded. Reckless pieces are useful only once. The next round won't start with the bank. It will start when one of them decides the others are in their way. It starts with a shadow where there shouldn't be one. Renee is deep in a quiet reconnaissance pass through a third-party vendor linked to the bank when she catches it. A packet that mirrors her own timing almost exactly. At first, she assumes it's an echo from the system, but the signature isn't hers. Someone is there with her, pacing her moves just close enough to blend into her trail. Valerie doesn't bother hiding his presence entirely. He wants her to notice, just enough to plant a question in her mind. Who else knows this road? He slips in and out of her periphery, sometimes pulling ahead, sometimes letting her catch him. A dance without music. Carl isn't watching this vendor directly, but the connection between it and the Brittle Endpoint means some of the traffic bleeds into his logs. He spots the double signature pattern and knows immediately it's not a normal operational anomaly. 2 intruders moving together but not in sync is a rare thing. Malik suggests they escalate it to the vendor, but Carl says no. If they're in there, it's not for the vendor. They're chasing each other. Renee tests the shadow following her. She doubles back twice, inserts a deliberate delay in her command sequence, even takes a detour through an unrelated directory. Each time, the shadow adjusts, never losing her completely. Whoever they are, they're skilled enough to avoid tripping alarms and patient. Valerie notes her counters and doesn't press. He's not here to scare her off, only to measure her reactions. Every detour she takes tells him how she prioritizes safety over speed, how she chooses exits over prizes when pressed. Carl begins quietly mapping both patterns against his earlier logs from the bank breach. The matches aren't perfect, but they're close enough to confirm what he already suspected. These are 2 of the 3 ghosts that slipped out that night. In the Watcher's darkened room, 2 trails move in parallel across the display, their proximity steady, their intentions opaque. The Watcher marks the moment. Parallel hunts rarely stay parallel for long. And somewhere in between, neither fully ahead nor behind, Renee makes a decision. If her shadow wants to follow, she'll lead them somewhere worth going. A place where she can see them clearly. Renee chooses her destination carefully. It's not the bank, not yet. Instead, she threads toward an abandoned corporate portal she stumbled on months ago. A system left online long after the company behind it dissolved. Its servers are dusty in the digital sense. Outdated OS, unpatched vulnerabilities, sloppy authentication. Perfect for staging something that looks real but isn't. Valerie follows, curious. He recognizes the portal as low value on its own, but he also knows it's the kind of place an experienced operator might use as a proving ground. If she's bringing him here, she's either testing him or laying bait. Either way, he plays along. Carl picks up both their trails again when they pass through a shared routing hub. He doesn't know the endpoint they're headed for, but he can tell it's outside the bank sphere. That makes him uneasy. If they're building something off-site, it could circle back in ways he can't anticipate. Malik asks whether they should block the routes at the bank's edge. Carl shakes his head. Not yet. Let's see what they're building. Renee slips into the portal and plants a breadcrumb. A small, harmless file disguised as sensitive credentials. It's designed to be irresistible to anyone looking for leverage, but it's also tagged with a signature she can trace. She doesn't care if Valerie knows it's bait. What matters is whether he touches it. Valerie sees it immediately. It's too perfect, sitting in plain sight like a pearl in a mudflat. He doesn't take it, not directly. Instead, he sets up a low-frequency watcher, waiting to see if anyone else comes for it. If Renee wants to test him, he'll test her back. Carl's sensors catch the signature on the breadcrumb the moment it's planted. He recognizes the trick. He's used it himself. Whoever set it knows how to make bait without leaving fingerprints. In the Watcher's dim-lit room, The abandoned portal now glows faintly on the map, a lure in a dead zone. 2 operators hover near it, neither taking the prize, both watching the other watch it. And in the silence between moves, Renee wonders how long he's willing to wait, and whether she's patient enough to outlast him. The stalemate lasts 3 days. Renee checks the portal in short, irregular bursts, never at the same hour twice. Each time, the breadcrumb is still there, untouched. She tells herself she's not disappointed, that the point was to mark her shadow, not to catch them. But part of her wants him to make a move, to confirm he's more than just a reflection in the network's glass. Valerie watches in equal measure, though his visits are even subtler. He routes through different continents each time, masking his origin until the hops blur into anonymity. He sees her patterns, the way she lingers a few seconds longer with each check, the way her connection spikes slightly when she arrives, betraying anticipation. Carl, still tracking from the periphery, begins noticing something else. Another signal. Faint, irregular, almost dismissible as background noise. It's not coming from Renee or Valerie, but from a separate, low-powered device pinging the portal at odd intervals. Malik thinks it's automated scanning from some forgotten security tool. Carl isn't so sure. It's too deliberate. Someone's watching them watch each other. The watcher knows exactly who that someone is themselves. The extra pings are probes, confirming the breadcrumb's integrity, making sure the bait stays in place until one of the 2 players decides the waiting game is over. Renee finally breaks the tension. On the 4th night, she accesses the breadcrumb and alters it. Not enough to remove it, but enough to insert a hidden reply. A short string of code, meaningless to anyone who doesn't know what to look for, but clear to someone paying attention. Your move. Valerie finds the change within hours. He smiles without meaning to. He doesn't touch the file, but he drops his own addition in an adjacent directory, a fragment of data referencing a location in a completely different network. A place that says, without words, follow me. Carl sees both changes hit in quick succession. He leans back in his chair, realizing he's not just tracking intrusions anymore. He's watching a conversation. And somewhere in the shadows, the watcher notes the shift. The game has stopped being about the bank entirely. Now it's about each other. Renee debates for hours before taking the bait. The location Valerie left isn't an obvious trap. No glaring vulnerabilities, no telltale signs of a honeypot, but it's too clean. No stale user accounts, no clutter of forgotten files, just a handful of directories with cryptic names. It feels curated, like someone tidied the room before inviting her in. She enters anyway, but slow. No direct downloads, no long stays in one place. She ghosts from directory to directory, noting the file sizes, timestamps, and naming conventions. Patterns emerge, not in the content, but in the absences. There are spaces where files should be, and those empty slots sketch the outline of something larger. Valerie watches her explore. He's not concerned with the files themselves. They're props, placeholders. What he wants is to see how she moves through an environment she doesn't control, which risks she takes, which corners she avoids. Carl has only partial visibility here. The connection between Renee's machine and Valerie's staging ground passes through a neutral relay he can't access directly. Still, he catches enough fragments to know they're in a closed loop, feeding each other steps without letting anyone else in. Malik asks if they should intervene. Not yet, Carl says. They're showing each other their hands. The longer they play, the more they'll show us. Renee finds her way to the deepest directory. Inside is a single text file named 01. Opening it reveals a short string of numbers and letters, nothing she recognizes, but the formatting reminds her of location tags in certain secure systems. It's either an invitation or a warning. She copies it down, then leaves without touching anything else. Valerie notes the exact second she exits. She didn't take the bait fully, but she took enough to keep the exchange alive. In the Watcher's room, the map now shows 2 glowing points far from the original battlefield of the bank. The lines between them are sharp, direct, unbroken. The Watcher leans forward slightly. Games like this, once started, have a way of ending with only one player left. Renee spends the next day unraveling the string from the 0-1 file. At first glance, it's just random characters, but when she breaks it into chunks and runs them through a few transformation scripts, a pattern surfaces coordinates but not in the physical world. They map to a sector of a little-known data center in the Baltics, one she's only seen mentioned in obscure InfoSec chatter. Rumor says it's a staging ground for multiple high-tier operators, a neutral zone where trades happen quietly. She knows better than to wander in blind. Before even touching the network, she spins up a sandboxed environment and cloaks it with layers of obfuscation. This isn't the kind of place you scan openly. The wrong handshake could have half a dozen silent predators looking your way. Valerie is already there. He's been idling in the periphery, watching new connections blink in and out like fireflies. When Renee's disguised signal appears, he knows instantly it's her. The disguise is good, but her timing and bandwidth usage give her away, the same rhythm he's been following since the bank. Carl sees the faintest ripple as both their traffic crosses one of his external monitoring nodes. It's not enough to identify their destination, but it tells him they're in a shared space again, somewhere off the main grid, somewhere harder to follow. He begins widening his net, pulling in less obvious telemetry sources in hopes of catching their scent. Renee edges into the Baltic Node and finds a cluster of sealed containers. Most are encrypted, but their metadata is public: file sizes, creation dates, hash fingerprints. Some belong to known actors. Others are anonymous. The 0-1 code Valerie left corresponds to one of these anonymous containers. She doesn't open it. Instead, she mirrors the metadata and drops a small, inert file of her own into a public holding area, her way of saying she's here without committing to anything. Valerie catches her signal within seconds. She's careful, maybe even cautious to a fault, but she hasn't walked away. That's enough for now. And in the Watcher's room, the Baltic Node glows bright on the wall display. 2 points inside it, hovering in deliberate orbit, neither breaking the line between them. The Watcher knows what comes next. In places like this, eventually someone always opens the box. Renee breaks the seal. It happens after 2 more days of circling the Baltic Node, each pass bringing her a little closer to the anonymous container marked by Valerie's 0-1 code. She tells herself she's opening it to understand his game, but the truth is simpler. Curiosity always wins. The container isn't a trove of stolen data. It's a ledger, rows and rows of transaction markers, each referencing an exchange between unnamed parties. Dates, digital signatures, cryptographic handshakes, all stripped of real-world identifiers, but with enough structure to suggest these trades are significant. Weapons, access credentials, proprietary code. The kind of commerce that exists only in the shadows. Valerie knows the instant she opens it. He'd salted the first line with a microscopic anomaly, an extra byte no normal viewer would keep intact. When she downloaded the file, that byte echoed back to him like a whisper. Carl, still chasing fragments across the mesh of his external net, finally gets a break. One of Renee's obfuscated routes brushes against a monitored relay. The signal is faint, but it's enough to triangulate. She and the shadow she's been dancing with are anchored in the Baltics. The Watcher leans back, satisfied. The ledger was placed there for a reason, to see who would take it, and to decide what to do when they did. Valerie makes his move. He sends a direct ping to Renee, not in plain language, but as a crafted anomaly in a metadata field she's certain to inspect. The message is simple: meet here. The here is another coordinate in the same data center. A sealed enclave with stricter access rules. Renee hesitates. Accepting means stepping into an environment he controls. Declining means ending whatever strange rapport they've built. She decides on a third option: she'll go, but in a disposable shell with nothing tying back to her real infrastructure. Carl sees both their patterns shift at the same time and knows it's not coincidence. He begins mapping their movement against the data center's known topology, piecing together an outline of their meeting place. Inside the Enclave, Valerie presents his real test: a shared workspace containing 3 locked chests. Each chest requires both of them to input a key simultaneously. The files inside aren't labeled. Renee plays along, unlocking one chest. Inside, Raw exploit code for a vulnerability she's never seen before, fresh and unpatched. A dangerous gift or bait. Carl gets inside. It takes a long chain of piggybacked routes and a little bit of luck, but he slips into the Enclave as a silent observer. He can't see their screens, but he can see the flow of data. 3 exchanges, rapid but precise. No excess movement, no fumbling. These aren't adversaries here, they're working in sync. Renee takes the exploit, but she doesn't run it. Instead, she places it in her own locked container inside the Enclave, leaving it visible but inaccessible to Valerie. He seems amused rather than frustrated. Carl marks the exploit's fingerprint and quietly exfiltrates a copy without either of them knowing. The Watcher, meanwhile, flags the chest's contents for broader distribution. A vulnerability this sharp won't stay in one pair of hands for long. It will ripple outward, drawing new players into the game. The ripple becomes a wave. Within a week, probes matching the exploit's signature appear in networks far from the Baltics, South America, Southeast Asia, even inside Carl's own monitored clients. Someone has leaked it or sold it, and now it's loose. Renee traces one of the probes back to a mid-tier operator she's crossed paths with before. Clumsy, opportunistic, unlikely to have found it on their own. That means someone passed it down. Valerie knows what it means too. Whatever fragile neutrality existed between him and Renee is gone. Once a tool spreads this far, it becomes a liability. He locks down his own systems and burns the Enclave connection. Carl coordinates with Malik to deploy defensive patches across every network they can reach, knowing full well they'll never get them all in time. The Watcher watches the spread without moving to stop it. This is the natural order: one spark, many fires. The players will scatter, regroup, and the board will reset. Renee deletes the breadcrumb from the abandoned portal. Valerie wipes the 0-1 file. Carl shuts down the Brittle Endpoint for good. For now, the game is over, but the Watcher leaves the map open. New trails will appear soon enough.